Thank you. Does this sound okay? Good morning, everyone. It's quite early to be talking this much, so I hope it's enjoyable. The topic is reverie, which I think is really relevant to my practice because it is about daydreaming. I've always been told that I think very laterally, so I think sideways about projects as opposed to kind of literally interpreting projects. And I think that's because I'm a furniture designer by trade, but I have no great interest in furniture itself. I look at furniture as a forum to explore ideas, which means that there's a kind of liberation of what that can be. I thought I'd make this kind of informal because I'm not quite a very formal person. And so I wanted to talk through a series of projects that I've done in the past that I've really enjoyed, but talk about them from a stance of where they began through a daydream. And by daydream, I mean, like, when I looked at the research of daydreaming, it's something like 48% of your day is actually spent daydreaming. And I'm sure you all share the same thing as me, which is that the best kind of daydreams are the ones where you're in the shower or you're in non-space. So I don't drive, so I spend a lot of time on public transport, which means that I'm spending upwards of 2 hours a day in this kind of daydream state of transience. I'm either listening to Radio National or classical music or something, and in that space is a really kind of deep thought. And I think you might be aware about subconscious versus conscious mind. So the conscious mind is the one that you hear and you talk to and you're aware of. The subconscious mind is the one that tackles the complex problems. So since knowing that for the last decade, I've kind of tried to feed my conscious mind with as much information as possible to allow my subconscious mind to kind of do the working for it. Which means when I try to approach projects, I try to approach them quite laterally. I thought I'd start with a piece of advice. It's not specific to daydreaming, but it is something I'm really interested in. This was taught to me when I was 18 or 19 years old, which was the person you're talking to is always going to be more interesting to listen to because you already know everything you know. Almost all of my work is collaborative, or either formal or informal collaborations. My business, full-time job, my collaborative platform, and even my personal practice. I only noticed just recently I have 6 pieces in the NGV permanent collection, and half of them are collaborations with people who aren't in the collection, but they are collaborations. And I think it's really important to note that we aren't just individuals with careers trying to forge something that's popular or something. We're actually we're part of a group of people like you are here, and collectively work is far better than a singular, which is probably why everything I do involves lots of people, or at least talking to lots of people. This is how I define myself in my practice, pro-am. You probably heard it before in use of term with sport. So pro-am refers to professionally amateur. It's a term that refers to a field that maybe doesn't get paid but plays at the same level as professional. It's an idea of liberation. So I work across 3 different practices simultaneously. And so I guess that's how I live my life, is in this kind of professionally amateur state, which means that I can both explore topics that I'm entirely naive towards. So it means that if I'm approaching a technology project, I'm not going in there pretending like I'm really overly confident or pretending that I absolutely know nothing. That kind of naive state means that I can work really productively as opposed to feeling really weird about the situation. It's a really weird way to work, but it's really good to self-identify as being professionally amateur. So these are the 3 projects I work on simultaneously. So I work on my own singular practice, which is where I do mostly work with contemporary art galleries to produce theoretical works or conceptual works. I run a full-time business called Dow Jones. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but we run a furniture company and lighting interior product company. Most people know me as the Dow Jones or Dow personality, but I actually produce far more work outside of Dow Jones than I do within. It just so happens that that's the kind of popular forum. The whole purpose of Dow Jones from the beginning was to produce Australian-made accessible furniture. And along the way, I've just been allowed and enabled more and more to become more of myself and to do what I feel feels right for a company. Which is great because we're 8 years old next month and we're doing really well, which is good. Then I run another project called Friends and Associates, which is the 3rd iteration of a collaborative project. So over the last 10 years, I've organized 14 group exhibitions out of necessity, because 10 years ago there were no kind of design, collectible, conceptual, theoretical design exhibitions for furniture and interior. So I started doing one 10 years ago. And so in the last 6 years, I've done 7 shows with Friends and Associates. This is how it all looks. So a lot of people ask, how do you disassociate from each project, or how do you work on them simultaneously? Because generally Dow Jones is a full-time business, which consumes all my time. And then I do 4 to 6 exhibitions a year through my personal work, both Australia and overseas. And then Friends and Associates does 1 to 2 group exhibitions. And the largest group exhibition I've organized was with 58 designers. So you can imagine how much admin is required for 58 designers to get something into a room for an 11-day event. So they all happen all at the same time, but the reason why they're all successful is because they all work simultaneously with my own brain. This is the first thing I ever made. which probably is the best way to describe how I'm a bit of a weirdo and a nerd simultaneously. This was kind of like a daydream. So this is the first project I ever made in 2011 when I was studying furniture design at RMIT. We were asked to produce something from a composite material, which of the 14 people in the class, 13 of them use epoxy resin, which, as you know, is toxic and terrible. Especially, 11 years ago, it was horrible stuff. And so I looked at, replacement composite materials, and so I came up with a biodegradable plastic. So this is called the kid's straw stool. You cook all the ingredients, you buy all the ingredients from the supermarket, you cook it on your stovetop, and then you bake it in the oven for an hour. And when it comes out, it's rock solid like a stool. It uses pea straw, the same way fiberglass acts, which gives something structure. And it means that most kids' furniture is terribly cheap plastic, which lasts for 1,000 years. And so you can make this for $11 from the supermarket. You can bake it in your own oven, and at the end of its life, you can put it in the compost, and it breaks down in 4 to 6 weeks. And then from there, the idea was that you could put grass seeds or other kind of seeds in it, and something would grow. So I guess I kind of self-initiate a lot of projects, and I just do them. I think that's the difference between me and a lot of other designers, is that if I have an idea or a daydream or an idea, instead of just being a bit too stressed about what it could become or how much work I need to do it, I actually just begin doing it, which is where this project came from, which was really good. This was the first group exhibition I ever organised, which was, I think, 12 or 13 years ago. I was 21 years old. I was just kind of sitting around my house thinking. I moved to Melbourne 14 years ago, and I had no idea about furniture. I didn't know anyone in Melbourne. I moved here with my now wife. And so I was just kind of looking at Melbourne, and there were no design exhibitions at all. Like, just really, there was Fringe Furniture was the only real design exhibition. And so in this kind of ridiculous idea, I just thought, well, why don't I just do one? Like, it can't be that hard. Like, I'm not a curator. I have no background in curation or organisation, but surely I can get like 20 people in a room. And that was my kind of daydream. And so I, contacted a bunch of people, and Brunswick Street Gallery invited us to do the show there. And they sold more beer on that night than they had in history. So it really showed that we could do these group exhibitions, which is where I started running these group exhibitions. And through the platform of Friends and Associates, we intentionally identify that we won't make financial gain from any of the projects. And so we intentionally do it completely free, with the idea that it means that people will be interested in collaborating with us, because they understand the purpose of it for us is to make good work and good shows. This is a project I did a few years ago. It's called the Best of the Best Table. The National Gallery of Victoria does a Women's Association event every year, which is the art of dining. And so the NGV asked me if I would design a table, which is where the benefactors and people can come along, and they raise money for the NGV Women's Association. And so it's a 3-day event. And I think most people, when they do these things, they build these really beautiful, glamorous tables with chrome and these glass sculptures or whatever. But my kind of thinking was that it only lasts for 3 days. Like, why would you build this thing that you probably can't do anything with for 3 days? So this is made from a material called polycaprolactone. It's a biodegradable and non-toxic plastic. It melts at 80 degrees. And so once you put it into hot water, so you basically boil a kettle, when it melts, you can then hand mold it with your hands onto a material, and then it breaks down in the natural environment, or you can remelt it. So everything on this table, so the wine glasses, the plates, the cups, everything but the cutlery was made from this material. The chairs, everything was this material. And then after the 3-day event, thankfully I sold the chairs, which was lovely because they had an extended life, but the rest of the table I melted down, turned into a dog kennel, and donated it to a dog charity, which they raise money. So you can see, like, a lot of my life and work is overlapping with a daydream, in that I don't kind of think so literally about or approach projects, but kind of, I guess, think blue sky. And I guess that's what my daydream is, you can just imagine me on the train listening to Radio National at 6:30 in the morning thinking about biodegradable plastic. This is another project. I thought I'd just go through a few projects because I think they're interesting how they came to be. This was a project called Open Garden. I did a project with a collaborator called Stephen Royce 4 years ago, I think it was. We did a solo exhibition for Sophie Gannon Gallery. And at the time, we really didn't have any idea what we wanted to do for the show. But Stephen was working on a project which had a kind of lighting component on the back of it. And I went across to him and said, like, what is that lighting component? And he said, well, I think you could just strap some iPhones to it, and it would probably light the project. And I think that could be a really cheap and efficient way to do this project. So I said to him, like, what happens to all the old iPhone screens? So we went down, we were in Richmond at the time, in a Richmond office. We went down to one of those phone repair stores, and we spoke to the person who was there, and we asked them, like, what do you do with all the old screens? Because the research online says something like 98% of iPhone screens which are replaced, or LED panels on screens which are replaced, are actually just are recycled, but we went and spoke to people in stores and they just throw them in the bin because it's far easier for them. So that data metric isn't being picked up because they're just throwing it in the bin. So I said to him, could we please have one? And he said, well, I can give you one for $20, which was really infuriating because it had no value to him, but obviously as soon as it became valuable to us, we had to. Anyway, so we bought some and we worked with 2 electrical engineers and worked out how to hack them. So we're able to, thankfully to our electrical engineers who spoke Mandarin, actually buy the iPhone 8 plans on the Chinese black market for $150 US, which was fantastic because it meant that we could spend the next 4 months with these people working out how to rewire iPhones, and it took an incredibly long period of time to do. But in the end, we worked out a way how to present these broken iPhone screens as actually new technology or as something that could be used for something else. And so we chose light and reflection as the two things. So there's 4 projects in the exhibition, and each of them did something different. So one was a static pendant, one had a flickering light. The one on the left had an Arduino connected to it, which was mapped to a cloud passing by. So you had this idea, so this beautiful movement of kind of cloud of light moving past. And the one that everyone remembers is the digital mirror on the right-hand side. So this is 32 screens with one single camera, one tiny little camera, and it's the idea of black mirror. So you can see yourself, when it's turned off, it's a mirror, it's just black and you can see your reflection, the idea of the black mirror of technology, and when it's turned on, you can see yourself 32 times. And the most fantastic thing is that the whole thing is this joke about humanity and our obsession with technology and waste. But the NGV showed the work during the NGV Triennial 2 years ago, and I sat there and just watched all these people take photos of themselves in their own waste. It was like quite a gripping moment. This is a project, one of my favorites of all time. It was a show I did through this platform I created called 1OK Club, which was about inviting creatives to make one-offs, because the idea is that, I work in production. We sell tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of products a year, which we make. And so the idea was that, you spend all this time with documentation, working how to make things production efficient ready. So I came up with a platform where you ask someone to just make one of something, which means that they never have to do it again. So for this exhibition, I was really interested in the idea of online shopping, which is where this kind of daydreaming thing comes in. I was sitting around thinking isn't it weird that when you're on an online store, you're looking at a picture of a t-shirt, but you're not buying that t-shirt. That t-shirt's somewhere else. Like that model has a sample of a t-shirt, but that's not the actual physical t-shirt I'm buying. It's in a factory somewhere, like it's going to get shipped to me. So I thought, why couldn't I do an online store where you buy the actual object that you see, but you can see it in real time? So this is a 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter block little booth that was set up in a car park, a 1,000 meters underground car park. It's in the factory. And so we built this box which had a live stream connected to it. So if you went to our website, 1-ok.club at the time, we live streamed the entire we live streamed the shop. And the hours of the shop were on Australian hours because at the night time we turned the lights off. So you could only see the work as the cars drove past. But the important thing is you can see on the right-hand side, that's a Lazy Susan. So that had a souvlaki motor connected to it. So over a 5-minute period, it would rotate once. And then it had the souvlaki motor was wired up to the smaller discs, which meant it rotated every minute. It would rotate in the opposite direction. So it was this kind of proposal of what an online store is, representing the physical object you could purchase. I feel like I'm going to run out of time. I talk way too much. This was a show I did called Welcome to Wasteland. So I was really interested in provoking artists and designers to think about waste and their own waste. So that's kind of what these platforms do, is say, you have a successful practice. How can I get you to think differently about your practice? And if that can impact long-term, that's really good. If not, then I hope the project's really good. So for the exhibition, we thought, exhibition design is hugely wasteful. Like every time you go to an exhibition, there's new MDF plinths, like they're going to go to the tip. Everything is made, like the vinyl is plastic, that's going to go to the tip. So we thought, how do we approach an exhibition where everything is kind of thinking through the idea of waste? So we invited 27 different designers to produce work using waste. In the center of the room, we asked the contributors to keep the waste that they produced in making their waste objects. So in the middle is the tip, which means that instead of hiding the waste that was created in making their work, we actually had it on display. We created through More Studio, we created a solar-powered website. We thought, there's a lot of, technology waste and electronic waste and electricity to run websites. What if our entire website was run off a solar panel? So we put a solar panel at the front of the exhibition, and we intentionally put a really small battery on it, which meant that if the sun went down for about an hour, the website went down. So it really meant that if you went to the exhibition, you knew whether the sun was up or not at the time. And it was just a really interesting approach to thinking about the way we consume things like the internet is actually running on electricity, and whether that has a kind of physical output you can see. This was a show I did in New York in 2018 called Lobby. We were launching a new collection with a New York designer called Tom Hancock's, and international exhibitions are just wildly wasteful. I don't know if you've ever been to any of these furniture fairs or these big design fairs overseas, but the first time I went to one was in Singapore. And at 5:01 the show closed, and then 100 people came in and just smashed down 3,000 square meters of chipboard and MDF walls and threw it in a skip. And it was quite disgusting and confronting. And so I thought, doing a show in New York, New York Design Week has huge amounts of waste as well. The Javits Center is ginormous, has all this waste. I thought, how do I do the biggest show in the smallest space in New York? And so we took 2 chairs to New York. We partnered with a store called Coming Soon in the Lower East Side. And this is in 2018, so this is before VR has exploded. But you walked into the basement of this building, it's almost pitch black, there's smoky jazz playing, there's incense burning. It's called Lobby because it's a transient space between physical and virtual reality. So you sat on the chair, which you could barely see in the dark, you put a virtual reality headset on, and then we'd model it up so that you could see the chair as you looked down, so you could feel it and see it. And then Tom Hancock's, our collaborator, had built these ginormous spaces that were visual within. So it was the smallest yet the largest show in New York. So you had the sensory experience of the chair, but the kind of visual stimulus of our brand within this virtual space. And it was just 2 chairs. That's all we got all the hardware while we were in New York, but we only had to ship 2 chairs to another country. This was a project called Never Grow Up Bench. I've been showing in Milan for 5 or 6 years, back to back. Every year we showed in Milan. And I kept thinking, how is that a resource that we can make use of? Sending things, bringing them back, sending things, bringing them back. And so in this kind of daydream state, I thought, what's really fun is the Stussy S, like the cool S that people draw. And I started, thinking through just how people, when they're young, they draw a lot. They carve into trees, they carve into the undersides of tables, they put gum under tables, like really fun stuff. So I thought, adults probably want that kind of impetus too. So we created this thing called Never Grow Up Bench. This is a bench we originally designed for a series of churches in Adelaide. And we took the bench over, and then we just invited anyone who came to the exhibition. We gave them a red pen, and we asked them to write on it, whatever they wanted, everything they could do, whatever they felt right. And there are some phallic symbols on there. You just cannot see them in the photos. And it just meant that, we had hundreds and hundreds of collaborators, and we had this mark made. So when we brought it back, we had this beautiful record of this experience in Milan. And the NGV bought it, which is wonderful. But the way they present it means you will never see that phallic image ever, which is also a very good thing. This was a project I did called Share Folder. I'm really interested in how you can run projects with literally no money. I think it's a really good way to begin a project because it means that you actually do have a liberation. This was a conversation I accidentally had with a professor of art history at Michigan State University called Mark Deneen. Colorado State University. It was an accidental conversation. I'd posted something, he was cooking dinner, and he accidentally fumbled and wrote TH. And so in that moment, because I'd seen Mark's work before, I sent him a message and said, how about we do a video call? It'd be really interesting to just meet each other. We seem relatively similar. And so we got on a video call, and we grew out, we thought of a project. We thought, you're in another country, I'm in another country. What could be interesting is, we don't need to meet. We could run a design exhibition, but what are we both interested in? And what we're both interested in is kind of capturing data around what people are doing locally and how they're using local materials and resources. So we came up with this idea called Share Folder Fantasy. We spent $50, bought a domain, and got a jot form thing, and then we put this thing out on the internet. We asked people from anywhere in the world to send us to make a vase from anything they like, make a vase, and it just had to last the length of an iPhone photo, like 1/8,000th of a second. So it made from ice, we made from falling water, it just had to last the length of a photo. And we're very surprised to receive 203 vases from 12 countries. It was a $50 project, and then we were able to host the biggest exhibition I've ever organized before had 203 different designers in it. And so there's that kind of daydream idea. $50 gets you 203 vases from 12 countries. And it was a beautiful resource of contributors, of people making work, all with the intention just to share something. So I'm going to run out of time if I don't speak quicker. This is one of my most recent projects, which is one of my last slides. I've done so many shows for Melbourne Design Week now. I think I've done 7 in the past 6 years. And the reason why I started doing group shows 10 years ago is because there were no group shows. When Melbourne Design Week started, there was about 30 programs. Now there's 350 programs, more than 10 group exhibitions in Melbourne Design Fair. And so we realized that there was no real point in us continuing to do group exhibitions unless we did something different. And so I was in the shower thinking about Melbourne Design Week at the time, thinking, what could we possibly do that's going to be different? And so I just thought, what's the point of these exhibitions other than showing the work? It's actually just about getting people to meet each other. And so I've been friends with a curator and researcher, Mif Dodi, for quite a few years now, and she's doing a PhD around how people meet. And so we thought, how about we do a Trojan horse style exhibition? So this was called 1 Hour Exhibition. It was presented as this kind of fun exhibition where you could, if you turned up at 12, you could exhibit your work, which was also a kind of idea that anyone could show during Melbourne. You didn't have to be a designer or an artist. You could just show work during Melbourne Design Week, and you could put it on your LinkedIn. I told people how to add it to their LinkedIn that they were exhibiting. And the idea was that you have to stay for 60 minutes. That was the whole thing. Turn up, bring something to sit on. If you don't, I'll give you an A4 sheet of paper to sit on. But you have to stay for 60 minutes. So on a Sunday at midday, we had 73 exhibitors and 10 people denied access to the exhibitor title because they left. But the whole purpose of the show was to lock everyone into a room for 60 minutes. So I went through and contacted editors of magazines, really high-profile Australian designers, and heads of schools at universities. So I had 40 of those people were design students. It was design editors, magazine editors, and they were all locked into one room. And there were so many beautiful moments I noticed where people could actually bump into each other and critique each other's fun work. It was through this idea of humor that people could break down this barrier. There's no pretentiousness because they could say, you've got an A4 sheet of paper, that's quite funny. Well, I have a sock, that's what I'm sitting on. And then they find out they're both quite, related to each other in the design world. I'm using this slide because I don't know if any of you follow Dow Jones on Instagram, but it's really become this weird world that I live in, accidentally somehow. It's really been this idea that was born out of COVID, which is that I looked at all other furniture brands in the world and thought they're really boring. Most other design brands, like furniture brands, just present a chair as a chair. And it's really uninteresting because chairs come from things. They come from stories and people, and spending $50,000 to do a video interview with someone who designed a chair is pretty uninteresting to me. And so I thought instead of running the social media for a company like Dow Jones, like most other companies, I could just actually pretend, I could just be me. I could create a kind of personality that's split off from mine, that's a little bit weirder than me, and actually just give off a lot of personality. So give off different things, that have absolutely nothing to do with chairs, but are relatable and are genuine and can be helpful and can be kind. And it's been really, really successful for us, not only financially through the business, but also just people understanding that we are real people and that, manufacturing locally is hard. And I do present that throughout stories all the time to show this is a hard thing to do. And I think people feel more related to it because of that, which has been really great. This is my last slide. I just thought I'd end on some tips. Meet unexpected people, listen to interesting people, and treat daydreaming as productive time. I like to think, being self-employed is really hard because you think that you always get the self-employment guilt. I always work longer hours than my staff, even though people always say, you could always take tomorrow off because you're self-employed. But I always work more hours because I always have the self-employment guilt. So I try to treat that daydreaming time where I'm just sitting on the couch, let's say when I'm supposed to be at work, as a kind of productive time because I am kind of subconsciously thinking through problems. And another point is just collaborations don't need to be transactional or financial. I've spent my entire last 10 years or 12 years of my career with what I define as informal mentors. I would never want to define them as formal mentors because it would box us into something like it's transactional. But I've had all these informal mentors over the past 12 years that have helped create who I am today. And that I think it's just incredibly important to work with other people, whether you're interested, whether their discipline suits yours or not, but they are still collaborations. Thank you.